Thanks. Before I start, I have to just have a drink of water because I'll never get through 18 minutes if I don't, so sorry. Oh, thanks. Okay, so not that this is daunting at all, first ever trade unionist. I want to deal with this trade union issue a little bit first because it was interesting when Jim was talking to me before I came here. He said, "You don't sound like a trade unionist" on the phone. I thought, well, gee, I wonder what a trade unionist sounds like. I've been a trade unionist all my life. I am British, you can hear it in my accent, but all of my trade union background is actually in Australia. That's where I became a delegate and an official and became passionate about trade unions. But I know that for many people, there's probably not much direct experience of trade unions. And I know, particularly in the UK, as in many countries, what you see and hear about trade unions is what you see in the media. And it's usually about conflict. It's not about cooperation. And what I want to show to you tonight, hopefully, is that cooperation is what trade unions are all about. And that's what attracted me to trade unions. So I should just say before we start, what is IndustriALL? And we heard that there's 50,000 collaborators with Tom, and that's very impressive. We as IndustriALL, we have 50 million members throughout the world. We cover 14 industrial sectors, and our affiliated members are trade unions at national level in these 14 industrial sectors. We were 3 separate organisations up until a year ago. I personally came from the International Metalworkers Federation, and as so many organisations do these days, we merged with other unions to form IndustriALL. So we cover from mining, extractive industries, processing, chemicals, plastics, glass, other materials, right through the metal sector, so automotive, steel, aerospace, electronics, through to clothing and textiles, garments, leather and footwear. And that's the part that I'm going to focus on tonight. But just to give me some idea, and we're all about collaboration tonight, I'd like you to collaborate with me and just give me an indication. How many of you out there are now or have ever been a member of a trade union? Okay, a few. So I think my second question is rather redundant, which is how many of you have been involved directly in negotiations, either on the trade union side or on a management side? Oh, rather more. Okay, so that's good. So there's some direct experience there, but a lot of people have never seen what trade union collaboration is about. So what I'm going to show you tonight is what we have managed to develop in relation to a specific problem, which is the situation in Bangladesh, in relation to collaboration. Okay, great. So my slides are up here. So this is the problem that we were seeking to address. And you've probably seen some of these statistics, and I could tell you a lot more about why the garment sector in Bangladesh is problematic, and we can get into that more later on. But just to give you a snapshot of the major headlines of what people see about the garment sector in Bangladesh is disasters, it's deaths, and this right-hand column is the number of people who've died. And this is just since 2005, and it's just garment sector, and it's just Bangladesh. And to try to address these problems, many things have been done. And I'll give you an example of what doesn't work and why more collaboration is needed. CSR auditing, and I'm sure many of you are involved in this and many of you know the problems, and there are certainly good things that can be addressed in this way, but it is not going to get to the root cause of the problem. It's unilateral, it's not enforceable, and it's not using all of the collective powers of the actors who may be brought to bear in a particular situation. And this is the result as it applied to Bangladesh. All of the factories that I've just put up that were affected by building collapses or fires had been audited by somebody, and auditing was not able to pick up those underlying causes that led to the disasters. So clearly this model is not something that's going to address even the most basic question of worker safety and life or death, never mind all of the other problems that exist in global supply chains about low wages, about lack of access to join a trade union, about long working hours. I think many of you may have seen the documentary that Panorama screened about 3 or 4 weeks ago, where they had an undercover reporter go to Bangladesh and showed some quite shocking footage of workers who were locked into their factory until 2 o'clock in the morning, and they'd been there since 8 o'clock the morning of the previous day. And this is typical. Auditing will not find these things, and we know that what factories do to cover up for the auditors to show a more appealing picture. So they have double wage books, they fake things, they brief their workers so that workers will give the right answers to the auditors. So all in all, this is not an approach that has worked, and yet it was the only approach, more or less, that was being taken. Trade unions, they exist very much still at national level. So you will see negotiations within companies, and as I saw some of you were being involved in those. You will also see negotiations at national level in many countries where agreements are set for whole industries. What we do not see yet is negotiations at global level. So we have global companies with global supply chains, but we don't have global industrial relations. And the Accord is a first step towards seeing how it might be possible for labour and companies to cooperate at a global level to try to address some of these intractable situations. So another problem with CSR has been, what do you do when you find a problem? What is your leverage as a company in terms of trying to get your suppliers to adhere to your codes? And most of the codes out there are pretty good, and they cover all of the basic rights that workers should have. But what leverage does an individual company have? First of all, in the complex global supply chains that we have, the company is probably not the only company that is sourcing from a particular factory. So unless you're Apple and you have an exclusive relationship with a certain supplier, it's likely that you're sharing that supplier with other companies. And I know this will be very familiar to most of you here. So whatever you do can only impact on the supplier to the extent to which the supplier relies on its relationship with you. But if it has other relationships with other companies, it may or may not take much notice. But that aside, say that you find a company, a factory, where there's a major safety issue. The only leverage that you really have is to exercise your purchasing power over them. And if the factory doesn't comply, you have to withdraw from the factory. The instant you withdraw, your leverage has gone. So the factory, if it can get other orders, it will continue in business and continue with the unsafe practices, and the sorts of disasters that we see will continue. So there's a fundamental problem in the system. It's not a collaborative system, it is a unilateral system. And what I'm going to show you is what we hope will be a more collaborative system that will be more effective and will protect those workers that it needs to protect. I'm just going to show you a couple of photos. This is the Tazreen fire that happened in Bangladesh. And after the Tazreen fire, a memorandum of understanding was signed between global unions and some NGOs. I don't know if many of you know the Clean Clothes Campaign. It's a very activist NGO in the garment sector. And this memorandum of understanding was about fire safety and how companies would commit to stopping the sorts of fires that we have here. At this stage, 2 companies signed that MOU. And we were finding it absolutely impossible to get more companies to sign. And this is a picture of the Tazreen factory. And this was dragging on for months, and everybody was saying, oh, I don't know, and what does it mean, and are we going to be liable? And there were lots of concerns about the MOU, and we only got as far as 2 companies signing it. And then this happened. And then everything changed. Unfortunately, it took the lives of 1,200 people for people to start thinking differently about how we need another model of collaboration to try to address these issues, because what was happening before was not working. And then we were inundated by companies wanting to sign. The original MOU was rewritten to include building safety, because these are the two issues, fires and building collapses. And when we first launched the Accord in June this year, we had some 35 companies that had signed up to it. And ever since then, interest has increased. And I have to say today, and we had another signature today, we're up to 108 companies that are sourcing from Bangladesh that have signed this accord. And this is completely unprecedented. There is no global agreement that looks like this between global unions on the one hand and global brands focused on a particular situation. And the collaboration has been extremely interesting. We met in Geneva as a group of brands and a group of unions back in June to say, okay, we've signed this thing. What do we do now? What does collaboration look like? We've never really done this before, and we've been making it up as we go along, quite frankly. But what we found very soon is that we're speaking with the same voice. You may think, and certainly in terms of the conflictual reports that you see of trade unions and the sorts of activities they're involved in, that there wouldn't be much common ground between unions and multinationals. But on this issue, we have never had a conflict. There has been complete unity of purpose and intent, and we've been able to harness that and direct the focus full beam on this problem in Bangladesh. The other part of it, of course, is that we are linked through our structures to the actors in Bangladesh, because this is not an approach that involves people swooping in from the outside and fixing it for somebody else, because that's not collaborative either. IndustriALL Global Union, our members are the Bangladeshi garment unions. The companies, their suppliers, are the factories where the disasters are happening. We are working with the Bangladeshi government, with the Employers Association, and with the safety authorities in Bangladesh. It is a complete program with everybody focused on the same goal. And this may sound like common sense, it may sound like the obvious thing to do, but it has never happened before. And this is why we are keen to promote this model of collaboration as a way of looking at other problems, and we can come back to that. I did bring you more photos, but I didn't want to show some of the photos because they are quite disturbing. So this is the Accord. And we have now got to a point where we're starting to employ staff, we're starting to get things going on the ground in Bangladesh. But I just want to give you an idea of why this is different and why the Accord may have some chance of working where others haven't. And the first, and Tom touched on it, this is about transparency. It's about everybody knowing what's going on. And this is, you know, given the example of Apple, this is not an obvious reaction for companies to have, more a reaction of cautiousness. What's going to happen if I let this information out there? But we have been able to publish factory lists of all of the factories that are supplying to that. Well, I won't say the 108 companies because we haven't quite got all of the data from all of the new companies yet. But on the Accord website, you will find a full list of more than 1,600 factories that are supplying to those brands. Never been done before. And you've got addresses, you've got employee numbers, you've got number of stories of the building, because this is very relevant. You've got all of the information that you would need to know where these factories are, and so that we can go out and inspect them. The second commitment on transparency is that all of the safety inspections will be made public, so everybody can have a look and scrutinise them and see what's going on there. Because our aim is to improve the industry. All of the brands who have signed have made a commitment, and this is the other part of why it will work. As I explained before about auditing approach, you basically only have the stick, and you beat the stick. The Accord has a stick, but before you get to the stick, there's a very big carrot, and that is written into the Accord. And the carrot is that companies will keep their sourcing in Bangladesh. They are not going to cut and run. If the factories cooperate and work to remedy the buildings, the brands will keep the business in Bangladesh. They will also help factories to find financing to do the remediation. And from the worker perspective, they will also ensure that wages are paid to workers. And we've had many situations of workers not being given information and basically, and you've seen it in the press, rioting when factories are closed down because they're not paid and they're living hand to mouth. Actually, just today, a wage increase was announced for Bangladesh, which is fantastic news. It's not enough, but it's a good step forward. But basically, Bangladeshi garment workers are living hand to mouth. So the cooperation of the trade unions on the ground in Bangladesh is absolutely essential to be a voice of trust, to explain to the workers what's going on and to transmit that commitment made by the brands that they will not lose salary because of something that is no fault of their own. And that way you can make sure that the factories get improved, that there's money to do that, and that there's the commitment of the brands to staying in Bangladesh. So it's a very big picture, and I've only touched on one aspect of it because certainly there's many governance issues in Bangladesh that need to be addressed. But we are committed to working with the brands to resolve that, because they want secure supply chains. They do not want to be on the receiving end of the sorts of news stories that so many have seen, because we know who the brands are. People go to these buildings after disasters and they find the labels and they put the names out there. So what we've reached with the brands that we're working with is to overcome this distrust that is inherent in a relationship between trade unions and companies, and I hope that I'm working some way towards dispelling some of that with you here tonight, that this is something that we want to do because ultimately our interests are the same. One of the things that I hear a lot from American companies is, oh, trade unions are out there to try to destroy the company, when of course if you look at it, it's quite the opposite, because our members need to have jobs, they want safe jobs, they want a safe industry. So we're working in a very positive way with the brands. Now, I'm not going to say that this is going to solve the problem in Bangladesh overnight, because as I said, there's many other aspects to it. But this model of cooperation is something that we believe does have great scope. It enables us to address these intractable supply chain issues with a methodology that actually has some hope of success. It means that all of the brands that are sourcing from a particular company will take a collective approach, and this is very new. I mean, those of you who with a corporate background will understand that what I'm saying is quite radical, not so much from the union perspective, but from the company perspective, is and lots of antitrust issues get asked about this as well, but fortunately we haven't run into that yet. How do we work collectively as a group of brands? And this has been very interesting to watch this process unfold, that the brands have started to get to know each other and have spokespersons that speak on behalf of all of them. And this is totally, in the DNA of trade unions, but we're very much watching the brands do this and helping them to do it so that we can have a collective approach and get away from that feeling of helplessness, of individual responsibility that doesn't actually enable you to address any of the problems. I hope that I can report in a year's time that we've managed to inspect all of the factories and get them up to standard. I think that's probably going to be too ambitious, but this is at the very, very beginning of a process that we believe is radically different and is absolutely essential to addressing these supply chain issues. And as Tom said, I'm more than happy to have these discussions further going into the group work afterwards and any questions you might have. Thanks.